Welcome back, Hopeful Tribe. We're here to talk about 3 questions about codependency. Ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Have you lost any time, money, or energy due to unhealthy relationships?
Yeah. So I hesitate to categorize them as unhealthy relationships. Maybe that's because of issues with codependency. um, but I have, when I think of like time and energy, it just usually in relationships that are kind of unhealthy. We have a cat in the picture. Not sure what's going to happen with that. Like, so I have an unhealthy relationship with the cat. No. Okay. So sorry.
Actually, you do kind of have an unhealthy relationship with the cat.
I
He scratches you,
he
he
does.
bites you,
He
and
does.
still you're with him.
He does, but he's just trying to tell me that he wants food, I guess. So yeah, it's like that. But when thinking in terms of losing like time and energy, um, so I can think of two relationships in particular where I was with people who had abused substances. So
Mhm.
one was a person who abused alcohol, and another is a person who abused food, um, and so or used food like kind of as a drug, and so all sorts of energy just with both, sort of making sure they had their needs filled, and even spending like extra money to make sure like they got the thing that they wanted. So, and just feeling like this sort of sense of responsibility, like we were close, so it was my job to help with that,
Mm.
and sort of being not really blind to the fact that it was super uncomfortable, but just going with it, and getting confused about whether or not I should be doing it, and what it said about how I felt about them if I was doing it. So yeah, I can definitely relate to this idea of just using up resources that I um, didn't even necessarily have to support the habits of two people that I was in a relationship with. And like I say, I hesitate to categorize them as unhealthy relationships because often you're in relationships with people you love, um, but I can definitely relate to that idea.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you have an exaggerated sense of responsibility?
So that's another one, really, and it relates to the previous question. I felt like it was my responsibility to help them be happy, and to help them satisfy their needs with what they wanted. Um, so yeah, this idea of trying to do it for the people. These are uncomfortable questions to answer.
Right,
Actually, yeah, they
right.
they they absolutely are.
Talking about our codependency isn't easy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, because it gets so confused. Um, what parts for me anyway? Some sort of like you're trying to be a good friend to the person, or you're trying to be a good just a good friend essentially, and so they'll mention a problem, and kind of think maybe it's your job to solve it. And if it's sort of unhealthy both ways, they'll let you or maybe depend on you for that, and then it's like this cycle where you're jumping in to solve a thing, or you're jumping in to help with this or that resource that they need, and then they come to expect it, and then sometimes it uh, it'll get to the point where the person who's the giver will get bitter because, oh, why am I, because within yourself it's an unhealthy thing, so why am I giving so much to this relationship? And it's funny how you're like patting my shoulder like, oh,
Well, you'll get depleted after a while if you're in a codependent relationship. That's part of how you'll know is that at some point you're going to get depleted and feel the pain. You
yeah,
know?
no, absolutely. And I think that's what I'm speaking to, that idea of getting very, very upset because I'm using resources that need to be spent either on me, and they're not helpful to be spent in the other direction. And then the other way, when you sort of like do things that a person can do for themselves, they start to kind of uh, have negative feelings towards you. So it is completely this vicious cycle of you feeling poorly because you're becoming depleted, and them feeling resentful because some part of their self-esteem, you're taking away their ability to even or you're kind of filling in where they should be filling in for themselves. So yeah, definitely that exaggerated sense of responsibility. Yeah, I've struggled with that.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, one of the hallmark characteristics of codependency is when we have that exaggerated sense of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Why is codependency so hard to recognize? What do you think?
It is really hard for me to wrap my head around, actually. And I even before we taped today, I was like looking up on the internet, like, what's codependency again? Because there's so many elements of it that, you want, you're in a, we start out in a family. You're wanting to be a good, be loving and kind to your family members, and then you get friends and you're wanting to be loving and kind um, to them. And so much of it feels like it starts out as, I'm just trying to help, or I'm just trying to be loving and kind and be supportive. Um, and then, so it's hard to recognize until you sort of start to understand that you're undermining your own needs by helping in the way, and it's sort of over helping, and it's solving problems that you're, solving problems that aren't yours to solve, or undermining their ability to problem solve for themselves. So I think it's hard to recognize because for me, because I want to be a loving person, and and then sometimes where it goes too far, and you offer too much help, or you offer too much advice, or you offer too many resources, too much money, too much time. It's just hard to recognize because in some ways it's just similar to the good person who I want to be. Like good helping people is similar to the person that I want, is the type of person I want to be, a person who helps others. So, what's the line between being a nurturer and being codependent? Sometimes it's blurred for me. So yeah, those are some of the reasons that it's hard to recognize. And this one thing that I remember when I was looking up and trying to find out more about codependency, this one YouTuber was saying codependents are some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And yeah, you want to be a nice person, right? But you have to kind of look at all the reasons why you're doing the things that you're doing. So yeah, that's why it's hard for me to recognize.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Have you lost any time, money, or energy due to an unhealthy relationship?
So much. In fact, I'm pretty sure. Hello, cat.
Hey, this is Tora.
This
Means
is
tiger
Tora.
in Japanese.
Mm-hmm. Have I lost any time, money, or energy due to unhealthy relationships? Well, I like to say I would be a billionaire by now if it weren't for all the unhealthy relationships that I have engaged in over the years. Because, I mean, so much of my time, energy, and all my resources went to engaging in unhealthy relationships. And I think one of the risk factors, besides growing up in alcoholic homes, that we have in common is we were both raised Catholic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in Catholicism, being self-sacrificing is like an ideal, right? Like I wanted to be like Mother Teresa when I grew up, right? I wanted to give up my entire life in the service of other people, right? And yeah, that's beautiful until you think about like the everyday reality of that, right?
Yeah.
And also the other factor that didn't get into my head until I was in my 30s was Mother Teresa was a nun. So she had no living expenses. The church was subsidizing her existence. I, on the other hand, had to support myself. So I couldn't just live in the service of others. I should have just been a nun if that's what I wanted to do. Right?
I'm so glad you did. Do you have an exaggerated sense of responsibility?
Yes. I think that my hyper responsibility is maybe worse than a lot of others, other codependent people I've met, because not only did I grow up in this very, alcoholic addict home, my mother was also severely mentally ill and obsessive. So I grew up around this sort of driven, um behavior 24/7.
Mhm.
Like she was like that about work. She was a doctor. Um she was like that about raising us. She was like that about cleaning the house. Like in every area of her life,
Mhm.
she was super responsible. Like our house was never dirty.
Mm.
Never.
Mm, mm,
Never.
mm.
Like ever.
Yeah.
Our homework was never late. Our hair was never unwashed. We were perfect, you know? And it wasn't until I became a mother myself who was working that I realized how insane that standard was. That exaggerated sense of responsibility that she had really didn't serve me as a mother or my children. I realized that in order to maintain the standards my mother had, I would have to abuse my children. Right? That was the
I'm
choice
glad
I
you
had.
figured that out. That's
Right.
good.
That I was a baby when
Mhm.
I had my first two. So like, yeah, it was a pretty big insight.
Important one. Important. Why is codependency so hard to recognize?
I think there's a lot of reasons. The number one reason is we learn codependency as children, right? So it becomes our normal way of operating and it feels natural and familiar and like it's really hard to distinguish it from, you know,
Regular family life in some ways,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
So, when we're codependent, we're emotionally dependent on others for our own validation. Right? So we need that relationship in order to feel like we're worthy, right? My self worth comes from my feeling like I've taken good care of you, right? And so I think that becomes really problematic if you're starting to work on your codependency and you're still relying on that other person for your validation, then it's kind of hard to make a shift.
Yeah. Like I told you, as we've been celebrating through the holidays and that, how like when I used to have parties, I would just, so long as everybody else had a good time, I'm fine, and never really even sort of considered or got into the fact that
You say that one more time.
Yeah, I was going to let the cat get out of the way too. Yeah, so I never really sort of took into account enough how important it was for me to have a good time at events, yeah, in previous years, and how this year has been really a big eye opener on how much I did do that. Yeah, we're going to look over the cat.
I think Tora really wanted to be in one of the videos.
I think it's important.
I think he felt left out because all the other animals have been in videos, and he's like, "What about me? I'm cute as heck.
I thought I had a job here.
I'm so cute." Also, I think the other reason that it's so hard for us to recognize our codependency is that codependent relationships tend to be really obsessive. And so it's really hard to take a step back and see what our own wants and needs are when we're just completely obsessed with the other person all the time. The other thing that I think makes it hard for people to recognize their codependency in relationships is that the relationships aren't all bad, right? So some of the time you're having a great time with this person who's really nice to you, right? And so it's hard to recognize, like, well, but they're not always like a messy drunk, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're
And sometimes
like
at the
really
beginning of the drunk, it's fine.
Yeah.
Or maybe, yeah.
And maybe that person has understood you more than anyone else before. And maybe that person, like in my circumstances, I think back to my marriages, right? Maybe that person loved you more than anyone you ever met before, you know? And that feels good, right?
Sure. like some sorts of abuse. Yeah, there's like a good, it feels good in some ways, and that's super confusing, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. It's confusing when the person's not.
Mhm.
That's why kids get so confused with abusive parents, right? Because they love you and they're supposed to love you, and a lot of times they're showing a lot of love, but then when they're not, you know.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So you actually get all that mixed up in, is it all love, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. These are tough questions we've been asking each other, I think.
I think so. I think they've been really tough questions, but I think we did pretty well.
I really do. We did so well. We're so,
And feel free to answer any one of these down in the comments below. And we hope you stay loved and hopeful until we see you again. Bye.
goodbye. We did it.